we're going to talk about today is basically beef production. Jacob's really well versed in some research for different pastures and some stuff that's going on. We'll touch on a bit of that, but I sort of want to talk to you, start the conversation off with a little bit of stewardship, I guess, on animal health products. We noticed lately that APVMA have they've restricted some chemicals that we can use that are really important in animal health rotations for different parasites. So I'm just going to touch on a little bit of stewardship and how important that sort of stuff is to make sure that we look after those products that we've got available still. So an example would be Brazil. So over in Brazil, any cattle production ranch, if you like to call it, or facility in Brazil is 10 out of 10, 100% resistance to MLs, so macrolactic. So it's a bit of an issue, and we sort of don't want to end up there in Australia. So, all those drenches that we use on the animal health program, we actually have to protect them. We've got products like Sidectin LA from Verbac. It's a long-acting product. It's important that we give some consideration to cutting the tail off that drench and resetting that. The other thing I want to talk to you about is, market-ready beef. So we've got a lot of vaccine companies in the market. It's important that we administer those vaccines correctly. You'll notice that some of the antibiotic stuff that's come out of America has been it's spilled over here to Australia. So what we've got to do now is we've got antibiotic resistance. So that again determines a little bit of stewardship on, in using those particular products. So that's probably about it on the stewardship. Just be conscious of those products that you use and make sure you're using them correctly to give a bit of longevity, I guess, into those products. Rob's here. Rob Young. He's the dung beetle expert. I had a bit of a chat to Rob yesterday. Just about, what we can do, how dung beetles can impact buffalo fly, which is going to be a bit of an issue going forward, especially with APVMA taking these products out of a rotation system. So it was good to meet up with Rob yesterday. We had a bit of a chat. We've got a couple of little projects we might work on later on, mate. And of course, Jacob's here. Now, we're going to get to the crux of it, which is beef and beef production. It's very important. So if we've got a business model, we're going to take this business model to the bank, okay? Jacob, we're going to go to the bank and we're going to say, mate, I want to pay the freight both ways. I want to sell everything I produce for wholesale price, and I want to pay full retail for all my inputs. You're the bank manager today. What are you going to tell me? Be nice.
Sorry, I think straight up, where's the plan? Where's the business plan? Where's the business models? That would be my first take on it.
Yeah. So that model is inadvertently what cattle producers work under year in, year out here in Australia. So the other unfortunate thing is with those reports or that data is normally with a cattle producing situation, we run two books. We run the taxman's book and we run the actual book. And then sometimes in the cattle production system, we actually get confused at which book we're going to look at. So quite often we'll get confused with looking at the taxman's book, when actually we should be looking at the actual book. So it's all about production. So we've got your plot of land or your property. We need to know exactly how many kilos of live weight that you can produce per hectare from that property for this model to work. And things like what Jacob's going to talk about is pasture. Pasture's king at the end of the day. The cheapest supplement you can get is your own grass. I think it's roughly, and correct me, mate, probably 40, maybe 42 cents, 40 cents a kilo, thereabouts.
It's actually quite surprising. It can be even quite cheaper than that, depending on the inputs you use. Quite often, the higher inputs with nitrogen, you can actually reduce your overall cost of production because you're producing more feed with those inputs. Yep. But we can touch on that a bit later on.
Yeah, we'll go into that. So basically what we need you to think about is if you've got 3,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare after the green date, what's it going to do for you? How many kilos of live weight can you actually produce from that 3,000 kilos per hectare? And of course, we're going to graze it to leave a residual pasture of about 30% by weight, not by height, but by weight. Yep. Then that's got to get us to the green date. It's going to reproduce, and away we go again. Now I'll hand over to Jacob. He's got some pretty cool numbers on some pasture stuff, and we'll whop it into it, mate.
Thank you very much, Todd. I'm trying to not make this as very formal, so I will skip over some different parts. I actually have a PowerPoint here, so you can see it on the screens. So pasture improvement. Developing improved pastures is an important step in property development. So it's not just about feeding cattle, it's about developing your property. And that tends to be what I'm involved in quite extensively. It's not just planting a seed or hoping for the best. My role within the business that I work in, I do a lot of on-farm work where I'm helping a farmer budget, understand bashing their paddocks back into line so that you can actually grow cattle, grow crops, and then add nutrients to grow better crops, and then manage the pastures that you're working with. So improved pastures may consist of introduced grasses, some introduced legumes, or a mixture of both. So the need to replace native naturalised pastures with improved species stems from the pressure to increase animal productivity when margins between returns and operating costs are narrowing within a business. So I work with a lot of people where those returns are narrowing because they've been doing what they've been doing for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, or they've just bought a new block and it's not optimising the stocking rate that it should be. So 4 key points in pasture development. Now, this is from a pasture book named The Pasture Book that was published in 1949. It hasn't changed to this day. The processes are still the same. Make a good plan. Budget. Understand what you're going to do. Use plenty of fertiliser. In 1949 they stated that. Use plenty of fertiliser. So soil tests so you understand where the capital implications come to. Seed right and the right combination. Understand what the species are going to do for you, when they're going to grow, how they're going to grow, why they're going to grow. Can you manage those species that you're growing? Manage the pasture properly after they're put in. So I actually spend probably, as a pasture agronomist for 25 years, I would spend more time with graziers helping them manage the grasses and the legumes that they're growing, to understand the physical traits of the plant and how to manipulate those plants. Key performance indicators. So this is something that I take to many of the growers that I work with. It's not something that many growers actually use. Todd, this is a classic example, to be honest with you. Desired plants per square metre. So when you go into a paddock, as an agronomist, I'm looking at what plants you're growing, what species they are, how they're growing, why they're growing, and plant populations, because plant populations give you yield. Yield is stocking rate. So depending on the species, it can be 10 to 12 plants per square metre is what you're aiming for a productive pasture. Water use efficiency values. Now this is a very good one. You can work this one out yourself. When water use efficiency values drop below 12, so that's 12 kilos of dry matter per hectare per millimetre of rainfall. I do a lot of work with farmers with that. Once you're dropping below that, even a poor native pasture, you've got to do something with it. Like, it's just not productive. Your stocking rates are terrible.
So, sorry, Jacob, just say that again. So 12? 12
kilos of dry matter
Yep.
per millimetre of rainfall. So that's, in 600 mil rainfall zones, that should be, at least 7 tonne.
Yep.
And many of our properties are, to be honest with you, probably 3 tonne and below of dry matter. So that's feed. That's quite low. You need to start doing something with it, or managing your feed base. So more weeds or undesirable species and desirable species. So what's a weed to one person is not a weed to another. So when I go onto a block, some people will think Billawheeler Buffle's a weed. I think it's the most wonderful grass you've got going. It's how you manage it. So it's horses for courses. Total dry matter production decline or stocking rate decline. Either. They're both exactly tied together. It's just how you interpret it and present the information. Then the bottom 2 points here is use the right livestock and grazing tactics for improved pastures to maximise your returns. So in years gone by, I've had some of my really good growers who have grown a magnificent pasture and then they put old merino ewes on it. Now, for me as a pasture production person, I'm horrified by that. One, because the merino ewe, she's not going to give you a great return on your investment. And what investment you get out of it if she's in lamb, that's 18 months down the track before you're going to sell the animal or the lamb that comes off it. So you use young stock, growing stock. It can be cull cows,
Yep.
bulls, whatever you're doing, something that you need good weight gain very quickly, that you can cut its head off or, to sell very quickly. That's the most important thing.
But just on that merino ewe,
Yep.
I'd probably lean towards a merino ewe before a goat, though.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just checking. Yeah.
I was on the New England tablelands for 10 years, and that's why the super fine wool merino ewes, and hell, they don't even grow anyway, to be honest with you. That is what it is. And maximise soil fertility. Soil fertility is what drives pasture growth, which then feeds your animals. I've been doing a lot of soil testing for the last 9 years since I've moved up into Queensland, through the Downs, up through central Queensland, through northern Australia. Categorically, almost every time phosphorus is the major limiting factor, and that's a historical thing because the country was opened up many years ago, farmed, stripped, no fertilisers ever used, and it's gone back into pastures. That's your single biggest, generally speaking, your single biggest handbrake on production is phosphorus. But soil testing is the must.
So diagnostics, very important to work out where we're at.
Yeah. And a soil test is about budgeting for the future. So it's not just for now, it's a budgeting tool. That's how it should be used. So the next step when I go onto a property is I do total farm budgets or forage budgets. How many people have ever done a forage budget before? Especially on a farm before, like an entire farm? Not many. It's not a common thing that happens. I actually like to do this process and then deliver it to the grazier because, generally speaking, it scares the pants clean off them. They don't realise how much feed they actually have to grow or how much they have been growing. So it's a starting point. And this can even be with some of the really big stations in the Northern Territory, some of the big Western blocks, 50, 60, 100,000 hectare blocks. Yeah. It's a very good starting spot to work with. So this particular farm is up Mara way. He runs about 1,200 head of steers. He turns them over continuously through the year. The block is 1,906 hectares. Traditionally, 1/3 of the block is Lakina. I'll just skip over so you can see. That's the block in particular. 1/3 of it's Lakina, all the crisscross stuff is Lakina. The light green is a improved pasture. Probably that's a bit of a loose description. It's where there's a better soil type, so the remnant pasture's performing better. The rest of the country is rundown, dieback, melon hole country, so not very productive. Probably the most important thing here is he's growing cattle, so I'm working out estimates on animal intake, so that's where it's based. An animal eats so much feed a day, so you can work out backwards from there how much you need to feed it, what needs to be available. This particular block was growing or needed to grow, 7,360,000 kilos of dry matter a year to run these animals. So that's a rather large figure, 7 million kilos of dry matter. What it equates to is about 3,800 kilos per hectare of feed. So that would be 2 grazings about knee height with his tropical grasses. That's not very much. It really isn't much at all. That's with 1/3 of the block with Lakina. Where I go from here is, well, he was running out of feed. He was struggling to manage growth rates, and I've gone, well, it's a 650 mil rainfall zone. He should effortlessly be doing about 7 tonne of dry matter per hectare. He needs to add some management. So he needs to train plants, he needs to slash. Some of his paddocks were completely run down, so it was Indian cooch, wait a while, lime bush, just absolute crap. So there were some areas that we could improve very quickly. I've got a few slides a bit later on that shows what we can do. But I'm starting off at 3,875 kilos he needs to grow. Quite honestly, that's not much of a challenge for a pasture agronomist. That's a couple of paddocks and I can change it round. So this is a pasture development budget. The biggest problem on this particular block, like many central Queensland blocks, is a lot of it's been blade ploughed. So the biggest costs, so you'll see some of the costings here, it's down the bottom there, it works out $713 a hectare. In the first year of costs that were incurred, 43% of all those costs were one-off capital costs because we had to bash the paddocks into line. It was blade ploughed country, you can't drive across it. You can't run machinery across it. So these paddocks should be farmable country, so you can broadcast urea, you can stitch in other fertility, you can do other things. It was too rough, so they're the big costs straight up front. But we covered those costs certainly in the first bit of grazing, which I'll touch on. Production figures. So this is off the first 3 or 4 grazings. These are actual figures, so these aren't made up figures, these are tangible actual figures. So the 2 paddocks that we worked on total about 200 hectares or 200 hectares of farm improvement on it. They're a bit larger than that, so there's some areas that, you know, is unfarmable. We ran 517 head on the 200 hectares because it was an oats and rape mix. Has anyone heard of rape before, forage rape? Yeah, it's something that's normally used down south, but it has quite a good fit for us here. There's the weights. So what we actually produced off this with the multiple different mobs was an equivalent of 47 tonne of beef. So that's extra weight, that's grown beef that was actually produced from these 200 hectares. So the stocking rates were 2.58 head to the hectare, which worked quite well. Grazing began on the 29th of the 6th. So I will touch on all these animals were properly vaccinated, Yep. They were properly drenched, they had a HGP because that's what this particular grower wanted. So they were all ramped up before going on to the crop. The crop was actually at quite a very last stage. I'm a pasture agronomist, this is what I do. I want the animals to be growing at maximum growth rates. So I don't want a big wedge of feed, I want the animals in there. It was 2 paddocks side by side, so we were able to flip them from one paddock to the other, 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 which means we get regrowth. Concurrent regrowth is fantastic. That's how we grow animals, rather than just stocking one big paddock where they're all in it and then you run out of feed. So that's not what we were doing. So 47 tonne, which was pretty happy. This was his first ever attempt at growing feed before, so he was from a pretty ordinary bit of dirt beforehand and had never grown anything, so this was his first go. He was pretty chuffed. There's a photo of him a bit later on. So just to then give you a comparison of standard buffel in the area, and this is actual tangible figures where I've taken from another station, and then some dieback affected country, which is what this was. So in the same 156 days on buffel country, you might produce about 12 tonne of beef on the same paddock, or over the same 156 days, 5 tonne of beef versus the 47. Dieback affected country, because our stocking rates are so low, so normally we're sitting at 1 beast per 6 hectares. You're looking at, 6 tonne of beef for the whole, 6 tonne of beef for that sort of year. That's why this grower was so interested in growing feed. He wanted to produce beef.
Just on that, no supplements in your paddock?
Yeah, there was actually.
Yep.
So the supplements were a magnesium-based flick.
Yep.
And the reason I recommend a magnesium-based flick is with these crops, because they grow so rapidly, there's a lot of data out there that shows magnesium uptake is quite poor in cereals. So a magnesium lick is very important. It's not mobilised in the soil and then taken up by the plant very effectively. So there's some compounding benefits of a magnesium lick. The animals actually took to it really well too. So there's magnesium licks and then there's magnesium licks.
Yeah, well, James Dixon from Dixon Ags in the audience here, he'll be happy to hear that. He's a heavy mag man. He loves his magnesium.
Yes, especially in cereals and huge growth rate plants. Yeah, that's very important. That's a very good topic, Todd. The perennial budget. So we've then moved out of that and we've gone into a perennial system at the moment. I don't have live weight gain figures because we're still in that process and I haven't been up with a grazier talking to him about it. But I know anecdotally those live weight gains are actually far more impressive on the perennial pasture than they are on the annual pasture. And what the perennial pastures are, this is a bit different. So one paddock's 90 hectares, it's the same two paddocks, and the other paddock's 110 hectares. You'll see the costs have come down significantly because we haven't had those one-off capital costs, which is the ploughing, the levelling, the prickle chaining to level the countries so you can actually drive across it and spread fertiliser and slash. So slashing is a very, very important part of what we do. That manages the plant because when these plants get going, so one of the paddocks is Gatton Panic, pure standard Gatton Panic with some Rhodes grass through it. Gatton Panic has growth rates of easily over 300 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day growth rates when you add nitrogen. When you get growth rates like that, there's not enough animals in Australia to keep on top of these plants, especially with our heat units and our good rainfall, which we've had this year, especially in central Queensland.
It sounds a bit provocative that we were going to grow this pasture, then we're going to slash it. Like it. Yeah. It's sort of. Only agronomists could get away with that, I think.
Yeah, and the reason being, the animals will tell you they've stripped all the leaf off it, and then it's coarse tillers. Coarse tillers and reproductive stems don't grow animals. Animals don't want to eat them. That's not how you get live weight gain off it. It's leaf, green leaf. And tropical grasses can produce a lot of green leaf, and the quality can actually be really good. Despite my company, we're a temperate business predominantly, and I have my New Zealand counterparts always describing the tropical grasses that we work with as being terrible and poor quality and just garbage and shit. Well, sorry folks, they are magnificent when they're managed, but you have to manage them. And slashing and tight grazing is the catalyst because they will outgrow you. So in the first 12 months, the Gatton Panic outgrew Barry. He was running 600 head and they were about 350 kilos on 90 hectares and had the stocking sat for about 3 months and the crop still outgrew the animals. That's what I'm saying. So when they outgrow and it gets lignified and you get big reproductive stems, Barry moved the animals out and he topped the paddock. Because the paddock is level and flat and manageable now, he can go over the paddock with a big slasher very quickly. And I was pretty chuffed to be there the day he was slashing, and I've got out. And Barry's like your Northern Territory stocky, big hat. And it was great to say, Barry, how was slashing a paddock? Did you think you would ever slash a paddock in your life? And his terminology I can't repeat here because there's women and children, but he was chuffed. We then hit it with nitrogen afterwards, and within about 3 weeks, we're grazing it again. That's production. So we can get huge production figures. Maybe next year we can go over this again, I don't know, but the live weight gains are pretty impressive from some tropical, perennial tropicals. Now, I will also touch on, we get into and out of the annual system as soon as possible. We only grow oats and rapes and things like that to give you a quick return on your investment. To bash the paddock into line, you want to get out of those as quickly as possible and into a perennial because that's where the big returns are. These plants should be in for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years if they're managed with fertility, with slashing, with proper grazing, and they will return big returns on investment for you.
Just on Barry, he's copped it at the pub from his neighbours, but they were wondering why he's slashing his paddock.
And in central Queensland, there's not too many blokes who have bought big slashers, but there are now a group of them in around Biloela, Banana, Mara, Bohemia who are buying slashes, and they have some rather huge slashes, so 12 metre wide slashes that are topping paddocks, because they know they cannot control the growth rates of these plants. Once they can control the growth rates, away they go. I even have some growers in Taroom. He flicked me some photos yesterday of his Billawheeler buffle, and he is so chuffed. You can see where the nitrogen's been applied and where the nitrogen hasn't been applied. He's gone in and looked at the tillers of the plants, and the buffles really till it up because he's applied nitrogen. He's chuffed. They're making more money than they ever have, and these are people who have never used fertiliser in their lives. Or slashed. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are good. These are really good numbers, and like some of the heavy lifting's already been done, which is really cool, and it's a credit to you for putting this together. Because go back to my earlier statement, how many kilos of live weight can you actually produce per hectare, and this is and that's a pretty good question. So fundamentally, in a cattle business, that's the number one question you should be able to answer before you go to the bank with your business model, where you want to sell everything for a wholesale price, pay the freight both ways, and then pay full retail for your inputs. Not that you pay full retail for your inputs from Elders, because we'll look after you. But yeah.
So I should touch on that oat crop. They produced 237 kilos of beef per hectare. That's what we produced that year, it was a pretty good year. It wasn't a great year, but it was a well-managed crop that did what we wanted. I had a long fallow beforehand. That's what's achievable. I'm just a numbers man, so I like to drive my growers to give me these numbers. They don't particularly like doing it, but it's a rewarding experience for them because they do get a buzz out of it once you see some of those figures. The next one is role of fertilisers and nitrogen. So another thing I've found with my workings in the north here is when I talk fertilisers with a lot of growers, they think nitrogen. It's not nitrogen. It's not just urea. A lot of my conversations is about phosphorus. Phosphorus, and how you use phosphorus. Elders have a lot of agronomists. Please use your agros. Phosphorus, generally speaking, can't be just broadcast on top of the ground because it doesn't move from where it's placed. So you've got to put it into the ground. That's part of the process of farming. That's why I annual crop for a year or two, to spread those big capital costs out. So it's not one big hit to you, especially the commodity prices of fertiliser for the last 3-4 years have been through the roof. So that's one of the things. Now, this slide, actually, the role of fertilisers and nitrogen, there is a direct relationship between gross farm revenue and fertiliser expenditure on beef farms around the world. The more fertiliser you use, generally speaking, the better gross revenue. But it's how you use it. So once again, if you're unsure, you've never used fertiliser before, soil test, use agros. That's what they're there for. They're there to set up budgets and help you make more money.
Yeah, so we'll go down a bit of a rabbit hole here because they're pretty cool. So if we look at Downs country, so Mitchell Grass Downs country, where we're solely dependent on its own ability to self-mulch. Some of these pastures have been grazed since they were drawn out of a ballad. And we sort of, up until recently, with products like, or species like Desmanthus that they tried to get established as a legume for that black soil country, there's been nothing done to those pastures for that extended period of time.
Yep. And my company's part of the selling of the Desmanthuses and the legumes, to be honest with you. Legumes have a greater requirement for phosphorus than grasses and most of our grasses. So you need to address phosphorus to get the legumes to be really productive and provide volume. That is a must. And that information is known throughout the world. P drives production. P drives legume growth. Hence lucerne, hence many of the Lucina stands I work with up north, there's no P under them anymore. And you can tell when there's no P under a Lucina stand because there's no leaf on them. They just don't do anything. Yeah, you pick it. So phosphorus is the driving force behind it. But be smart how you use phosphorus. Budget for it. Place it where it needs to be placed. That's why we have direct drills. That's why we have air seeders that ban phosphorus. So you get your biggest bang for your buck off where you place it and how you use it. But broadcasting it, unless you've got lots of P and self-mulching country, it could probably work, but it's going to take a few years as the phosphorus moves into the soil. But then again, some of those self-mulching soils can be 2 or 3 metres deep, and the pea can end up being 2 or 3 metres deep, which isn't where the plants want it either. It's not where it is.
There's core samples of Mitchell grass country where they found Mitchell grass seed 3 metres in the ground. So
Yeah. Horses for courses.
Yeah.
Understanding third inputs and livestock classes run high value animals and fertilised pastures. That's a must. That's what I push with a lot of my graziers that I work with. Maximising stocking rates to pasture growth potential and soil tests. That's another thing. So in central Queensland, some of our paddocks, we can be running 7 head to the hectare to actually manage it. That's the actual tangible figures. 7 head to the hectare to get on top of these crops. And that's gat and panic. That's Billa Wheeler Buffle. That's when these crops are managed, holy hell they can grow.
Yeah. I think, for that sort of that pastoral area, the importance to know what your pasture's actually doing throughout the year. So an example I'll give you is a very large corporate company approached me last year. They had 5 years of dry matter digestibilities for the Barclay tableland, and they were sort of questioning me. We get that deterioration in our winter period or non-productive period. It's normally 150 days. Sometimes it's 4 years, depending on where you are, drought-wise. But what they did is I asked them for their calving groups to overlay their calving groups with those dry matter digestibilities. So they were really stoked when they sent the calving groups to me to tell me that that last cow was going to calve in May. So that was a March, April, May calving group. So when I overlaid them, I looked down and it was 65% digestibility in that pasture, which was delivering about 9.2 megs of energy. And they thought that was really cool, until I pointed out that her biggest problem is 6 weeks after she has that calf.
Yeah.
Because that's peak lactation stress. So we went from end of May, 6 weeks, second week into July, correlated with the dry matter digestibility of 50%.
Yeah.
That cow is not going to be pregnant 4 months after calving. That cow is probably going to tell you to go and do something else.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. And that's where we match pasture. That's growth. Dry matter growth rates can be matched quite comfortably with rainfall intervals. So with these particular grower, I look at monthly rainfall intervals, temperatures to work out growth rates. In the north, the one thing we're not limiting is temperature, which is the single biggest thing for plant growth, which down south, they don't have a lot of temperature or daytime temperatures. That's why we can grow so much more biomass here. The one thing we don't control is rainfall. What can you do? But you can control fertility, which we don't do in the north. So there's other things that we can control to help fill those gaps. Some of these tropical grasses too, they will surprise you in around, for example, central Queensland. They'll be actively growing during the middle of winter if they have the fertility.
Yeah.
If they don't have the fertility, there's no response to that moisture that does occur.
Yeah.
And we do get rainfall, significant rainfall, during the middle of winter. And in those colder periods, it's not a classic 70-30 or 80-20 split. We do get rainfall during winter, and it's usable, effective rainfall if you have the fertility and the plants ready to rock and roll for it.
Yeah.
So we've been getting some really good growth rates off panic midwinter in central Queensland.
Yeah, wow, there you go.
Yeah, it's...
traditionally non-growing.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
And even in creek lines and creek beds, that's our most productive country.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about utilising the rainfall when it falls. I don't want to see it run off. I want to take advantage of it and do something with it. That's the aim of pasture improvement. Key points: develop a business plan for pasture development. Honestly, develop a plan. Don't just go haphazard at it. Don't just... As a word of experience as an agronomist, I've dealt with this many a time. I get called in, what pasture do you think I should sow into this paddock? After the farmer's either ploughed it up or sprayed it out, normally ploughed it up. I don't know what weeds are there. I don't know what the weeds have been there.
Yeah.
You're destined for disaster unless you can get an agronomist to have a look over that paddock before you ever think about doing anything. They want to know what weeds are there so we can cost effectively remove them and remove competition. and then you want to soil test first. You want to actually budget for capital P applications or K applications or sulphur applications. The paddock might need to be bashed into line. It could be blade ploughed country. It could have sticks all over it. I deal with old Lakina country. That's a bigger cost than anything I've ever dealt with. Just to remove Lakina is normally a $500 a hectare cost. That's just in machinery, just to remove the sticks and crap off the paddock, let alone the fertility that goes into it. So take soil tests, get her an agronomist, and elders have lots of agronomists. Get them involved early to help plan and budget. Utilise the feed you grow. So many of the blocks I work with, we're taking out 10, 15% of their farm, and farmers are often, oh my God, I don't have enough feed to run. Well, then I help manage what you do have there. So we train it, we slash it, we fertilise it. Quite often having bigger stock numbers in other parts of the paddock is the training process. You bash it into line, hence next time you come in, the animals take to those paddocks a lot better and take to the grasses a lot better. Many of our tropical grasses, you don't graze them, you don't manage them hard enough, you don't treat them bad enough, they need to be hammered. Soil testing is a must, absolute must. Seek professional advice on seed, fert, weeds, grazing. Here's a good one. One of my good growers, and I love bringing this up with him this year, he didn't come to me for his oats. I love this. I'm not going to mention his name. If he's here today, he'll know exactly who it is. He bought some oats off his next door neighbour, and didn't he get burnt? He planted about 3,000 hectares of oats with no germ test. The oats cooked in the silo, and my client has burnt himself big time this year. That's why we buy product with a purity and germ test, so you know what you're buying, so you can work out plants per square metre and seeding rates. That was a very valuable experience from this particular gentleman, and he's not far from here. Use a high value class of stock to manage pastures, especially for the first few years. It's about maximising your returns on investment. I am a huge one on that. No old merino ewes, unless you're going to cut their heads off pretty quickly. Goats, horses, unless you really, really cherish your horses. But generally speaking, when we have good pastures, horses die on good pastures, so it's not a good idea. No alpacas, no camels. Put something of value on it. Yeah, high value that you're going to kill relatively shortly. That's what I'd suggest.
Oh, I think Barry should get a camel while he's slashing, I reckon. Like, just to give his neighbours something really to talk about at the pub, yeah.
Yeah, his wife would love that. Yeah.
So they're really awesome key points. And Jacob, thanks very much for sharing those numbers. And it's sort of, you know, the essence of what we do, it's really hard to get lost in the whole beef production thing, because that's what you do. One thing you really don't value is your own time, which, you know, you really have to put a value on that. Like this, you know, I hear so many people say, oh, I was just going to put lick out anyway. Yeah, but how much is it going to cost? So you got the cost of the supplement, and then you're going to put it out anyway, so you put it out for free. I guarantee you the supplement you didn't get for free, so there's no way you can put that out for free. So you really have to value your time. So I did an exercise for a group of people where I listed a series of decisions that cattle producers have to make in a day. I got to 42 possible decisions that you have to make. Thinking on your feet, fixing bores, fixing waters, doing this, whatever. Then I put down a list of what, say, an average type job would be, and I got to about 7 decisions that they had to make. So, yeah, so you're busy people, and you have to value that time and understand why you're busy. But beef is king at the end of the day. Grass is king. Production is dollars at the bank.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, have we got any questions? Yes? Huh?
So the one thing that we talked about is that transition from tenure to premium.
Yes.
So we didn't talk a lot about that today.
Yep.
So can you give us the postage stamp presentation on how you do from that agency to that premium?
Well, it's, to be honest with you, what it is some in particular with these paddocks, it's some chemical fallows out of the annual paddock. So once they've been grazed out, they have a short lifespan, obviously an annual lifespan. We then fallow it during the summer months because I'm looking to build moisture in the soil, so that I have something to plant onto. The chemical fallow is because I've changed the fertility of the paddock by adding the fertilisers and the high numbers of animals that have urinated and crapped all over the paddock, so the fertility's changed. You always find that the weeds change then too, so hence a chemical fallow. So normally it's 2 to 3 sprays depending on the summer. Chemical fallow, the beautiful thing about that is because the paddock's then in line, it's easy to get over it. You've got big boom sprays that cover the ground very quickly. If you're onto the chemicals fallow quite early, the plants are quite small. If as I've experienced this year, if they get away on you because of whatever happens in the farmer's life, they're a bit bigger. It takes a little bit more chemical, but that's still fine to be sowing into. It's about fallowing, then into a perennial. All the perennials that the gentlemen, the people that I work with, we sow the tropical grasses. So we don't broadcast, we don't fly it out of a plane. We sow it into the ground so that we get maximum germ as quickly as possible, because seed likes to be planted in the ground. If you broadcast it out of a plane, so these are actual figures we can go over, you're probably looking at about a 1% strike when you fly seed out of a plane. 1% of what you throw out is likely to germinate. So once again, returns on investment, I want it planted into the ground so it germinates as quickly as possible and I have animals onto the paddock making money as soon as possible. This year, things have worked very well for me. So some of these paddocks, we've been grazing them about 3.5 months after sowing with a tropical grass. The year before, when we sowed our first paddocks, we sowed in May and we had no rainfall other than enough to get some of the plants germinated, and it was October was first grazing because we finally got a break much later on in the year. And the grazier was very concerned. He goes, well, we've had no rain. Are the plants going to die? Well, my biggest hassle with this particular gentleman was telling him to keep the cattle out of the paddock to enable them to hold on. So there was enough moisture. These tropical grasses and legumes can hold on for months and months and months as a seedling if they're planted. So we've transitioned quite well. So some of the paddocks are fully productive now and have been slashed and hit with some urea. And the last paddocks have they were sown May last year. So they were sown 2 months ago. They've had their first, or 3 months ago, they've just had their first grazing. They took stock off last week for the first grazing, so they've recovered quite well. Yeah, that's where we are. But the figures are much better with a tropical perennial grass, simply because they grow for much longer. Much longer.
So what I've learned from that is that you've got to have a plan, right?
Yeah.
You talk about this whole plan. It's not a one season.
No.
We're working towards something.
And building capital, in this particular instance, building capital P, so that we can have these paddocks growing for the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's the aim. Yeah.
Nice work, mate. Any more questions?
Yeah, there is with buffle. Different buffles, they have different growth habits. So Billawheeler, for example, really does need to be topped because it has a much higher growth potential than Gander or USA American, which are dwarf types. But yeah, if you can train those plants with a slasher, they respond. And Billawheeler in particular responds very, very well. So it's a rhizomatous plant too. So it has a different growth habit entirely. So it'll send out new tillers from the side. So topping it is absolutely it loves to be topped. Yeah, it responds magnificently well. Can produce huge. So some of my growers in central Queensland, here's an example of how much biomass they can grow. This was a worked up paddock. It was farmed. It was planted to pure Billawheeler buffle. It was slashed twice in the first year to train the plant to tiller out. It was used as a hay paddock. It had no fertiliser put on it from sowing, but from the last slashing to when they made hay off it, it produced 17 tonnes of harvestable dry matter in 70 days. That's
Wow, that's gas.
yeah. Yeah. It was a good season that followed, but that's what that particular plant can do. People don't like billow because it's not easily managed because it grows too fast. So you manage billow for what it does, which is it gets away on you. You need bigger numbers, more often in it, or slash it, or make hay, or do something with it. Many of my growers in CQ now who are. I do lots of presentations and I stand up and I talk about the virtues of Billawheeler Buffle, and I love the negativity from the crowd. It is quite toxic at times. It's fantastic. Many of those growers now are some of my biggest advocates for Billawheeler. Yeah, because they grow more feed off Billawheeler Buffle than they do off the other two by a country mile. But you have to manage it. So higher stocking rates, better leaf, and the metabolisable energy, the quality of it is very good if it's managed and fed.
Yeah, megs of energy, crude protein. So one of my take-homes is, so Billawheeler Buffle's two-stroke motorbike, you just got to give it some.
Give it lots.
Any more questions? No? But a big round of applause for Jacob there for that. That was pretty impressive.